how should Christians think about economics, and not just the stock market or how much interest we pay, but, the things of the world, the things that have to be molded and shaped into those products that we use on a daily basis? What kind of say should nations have in that? Is all kind of trade good trade? Is all free trade, you might say, good? We're going to maybe challenge a few of the normal economic points of view that we've heard, some of us maybe for the past several decades, on this episode of Theology on Air. I'm Evan McClanahan. I'm the pastor at First Lutheran. This is kind of a special one-off show we're doing today. This is for those of you who are more economically minded. It's a little heavy, I guess, on the economic or political side of things. Not that we're necessarily taking any sides or anything in case, you want to take away our tax-exempt status. But we do want to have an honest conversation about different schools of thought regarding economics. And I have with me as a guest a friend, Brian Lantz, who has written a book for Promethean Action. That's a group you're affiliated with. You maybe can say a little bit more about that, and you could probably get that mic even closer to you. But the book is called Rebuild the USA, the Trump Presidency and Beyond. So you definitely have a point of view in terms of, politically, you kind of see things perhaps one way. Maybe, but maybe not. We'll flesh all that out. But the book is about really kind of the things we need to do to rebuild sort of America as a great nation again. I do want to say to our listeners, though, do go to theologybythepint.org, theologybythepint.org, and that is where you can learn more about our events coming up and all that we do. We are, as hopefully you know, a ministry here in Houston that meets once a month. We actually met last night talking about neo-paganism and Christian witchcraft. That was pretty unusual. But anyway, check out theologybythepint.org to come to our events. Help support us, give, do anything that you can to support the ministry so we can have really interesting conversations that I'd like to think hardly anyone else is having, and in a way that hardly anyone else is having them. So check that out, theologybythepint.org. Okay, with all that said, let's kind of dive in a little bit. Sound good?
Yes.
All right. So let's maybe lay some theological groundwork, because we'll talk a lot about economics and maybe to a degree politics. But this is Theology on Air and Theology by the Pint, so we need to kind of lay some groundwork. In your book, you mention a number of biblical passages that talk about man's productive nature or character. Maybe just throw out a few of those kind of ideas that make, I don't know, humanity unique, or maybe speak to the way we interact with the real world, you might say, the natural world.
Well, I'd start, I guess, with the basic idea that we're constantly making physical changes on nature for man. That's not a quote from the Bible, but it goes to, it's said several times in the Bible, starting early on, Ecclesiastes and so forth, that work is God's gift to man. And I think that itself, is challenging for some, in some ways. And, if you go to Corinthians, Paul is, saying, whatever you do, whatever work you do, do it heartily, you know.
Yeah.
And we're often challenged to think in terms of our shortness of our life.
Yeah.
Right. We're only here for a short time, so we're work now because
while the sun is still up.
Yes. Yeah. So, but of course, Genesis. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it. You're right there. I mean, God Himself, we're told, started out by forming the world, right?
Yeah.
And then resting after 6 days of work.
Yeah.
And we're made in His image. So obviously, this is part of what we're about on earth. So I think that's the first thing. We're talking about economics. My field is, and my book, Rebirth of the USA, is focused on utilizing physical economics or physical economy as a starting point, in which you're setting aside the financial aspect And you're looking at this question of making changes on nature for man. You're starting with that and saying, okay, today, what do we need? What are we doing? What should we be doing? But from the standpoint of looking at the requirements.
Yeah. And that's why I wanted to have this conversation was in part because I do think that's an unusual sort of angle to look at things, because a lot of times when we talk about economy, people just think numbers. They think about accounts. Maybe they think about investment accounts or the stock market or something like that. And all that is fine. All that is a way to collect information, a way to ascribe value to things. We wouldn't say that that's bad. But we've clearly, I think I can say this, fallen in love with that as sort of the only understanding of economics, is sort of, better returns on investments for your stocks. And we've talked about this a lot on a version of this podcast that's called White Pill Radio, where Ken and I in particular will talk about economics, and he's more in the libertarian camp, and I've sort of probably moved away from that a little bit economically. And so, so a very basic question might be something like this. And this is a lot of the Trump, presidency's, his campaigns, and J.D. Vance's, life story and all of that, which is we have outsourced a lot of the physical production of things to other nations, and we've hollowed out our towns. In the defense of that, I had a conversation, I won't say with who, but he told me once, he said, yeah, we don't make the iPhone in America, but we still get like 98 cents on the dollar or something. I don't know what the number was. It was really high in terms of the value back, just because it's our idea, just the patents, the apps that are used on it, et cetera. And of course, I'm sure there's a lot of truth in that. But the point is that that has been the economic model for about 40 years. Is that fair to say? Where the idea is services, intellectual property.
The whole idea of the post-industrial society. I mean, that came in so much prominence even beginning in the 60s.
Is there something dirty about manufacturing? Do you think that there's something? I mean,
Absolutely not.
Yeah, but
it's the opposite.
Do people think that though?
And even Tim Cook, or you go back to the
Apple CEO.
Or to people involved in launching Intel. Elon Musk has spoken to this. Manufacturing is the means by which you actually make discoveries. There's the initial idea of a prototype and converting a prototype into something that then can be scaled up to to manufacturing.
Yeah.
But doing that then, as Elon said, is 10,000 times more difficult to manufacturing something than to prototype.
Right, because to make 1 million Teslas, you got to procure all the metal and the lithium and all the whatever, the rubber for the tires,
and there's all the problem solving that goes on, the human creative effort that goes on to solve the problems down the line, so to speak. If we're talking about a assembly line or whatever, to set that up, to do it, to arrange the machine tools, to do the industrial engineering. And if you outsource that means all those discoveries, all those spin-offs, somebody else gets them.
Right.
You don't get them.
Right.
They get them.
I want to come back to that. But just to lay the groundwork. So stewardship, I think, would be the main thing. That God says to us, be fruitful and multiply, subdue the earth, have dominion over it. And to me, that means clearly, take the stuff from the earth, manipulate it in the best sense of that word, to create out of it, to build shelter for yourself, or to make clothing for yourself, or to eat the food that God has given you. So that all should make sense. I would also say, I remember when I was in seminary, there was this phrase, probably didn't filter down to the kind of the lay level, but where all of a sudden it became fashionable to talk about how human beings were created co-creators. Now, before you say anything about that, there's some truth in that, but I got to where I didn't like that. I didn't totally love that language. Now, humans have creative capacity for sure. We are creative beings. We make music. We invent things, et cetera, et cetera. But creation itself, like pure creation, like creation from nothing really, is in the domain of God alone, I would say. But I appreciated the concept. I would say we're created producers, that human beings produce out of our stewardship and so on and so forth, which has an aspect of creativity. All that said, when human beings are not in a position to be able to create. I mean, that's kind of like immoral, right? I mean, wouldn't you say? Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's destructive.
yeah,
At least to me, I think many people today reflect on the past 20, 30 years or whatever, of being in a service economy and
yeah.
and
The gig economy. You talk about that a lot.
well,
in the book.
yeah, the gig economy and a more broadly a service economy where everybody's kind of moving into paper shuffling and you got lots of people working in hotels and restaurants and fewer people. I mean, less than 8% of our workforce is now in manufacturing.
Wow.
25% of our workforce is in any form of industrial production.
Yeah.
Transport, energy.
Wow.
Agriculture, all told, that's only 25% of our
Wow,
population.
that's amazing.
I mean, that's part of this outsourcing and
Right.
so on and so forth, right? And why we have this enormous trade deficit. Nobody can argue that we don't have a trade deficit we can't live with.
And are tariffs the way to balance the trade deficit, or is it more? I'm jumping the gun here, but is it more of Trump's way to get the manufacturing back because he says there won't be any tariffs if you make it here in the States?
Well, as we've talked about before, as I've elucidated, shall we say, before, from the very start of this country, we had tariffs. I mean, from the days of George Washington and Alexander Hamilton, our first Treasury Secretary, tariffs were part of protecting embryonic industry. Adam Smith wanted us to be a completely agrarian society, and Britain would produce the high-end goods, the high value-added goods.
Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, written in 1776. I thought that was the Bible of American economics.
No, absolutely the opposite. It was
what?
Written, yeah,
he's our great Scottish hero.
Yeah,
our great capitalist hero.
It's just.
Okay, we're starting to step on toes. I said that might happen.
Ben Franklin is a more. If you look at Ben Franklin's economic writings, for example, or John Winthrop, but then Hamilton himself, and then you have the Careys, Matthew Carey and Henry Carey. There's a whole American school of economics, and they completely opposed, and for good reason, from the standpoint of what we today call national security, that we had to build up our own manufacturing, we had to build our own industry, we had to promote it. Yeah. Many people don't know that. Hamilton, of course, who wrote the four reports to the Congress and the president. One of them called Report on Manufacturing, very famous, and you can find them.
It might be famous to people like you, but to the average person, they have no idea what you're talking about. So it's okay if you give a summary of what.
And they're available. You can find them for free. They're online.
Hamilton family's not getting any royalties anymore, so it's a PDF out there you can get for free.
Hamilton outlined he outlined a program for reorganizing the debt of the United States, the credit report on credit. He organized the First National Bank, the paper that was the basis for creating the First National Bank of the United States, and then the report on manufactures. And then in 1791, he went off and formed in Paterson, New Jersey, the first industrial planned center. It was a community, but also industrial integrated system. It was the start of the U.S. Industrial Revolution. So Hamilton was hands-on, but that the report on manufacturers, he specifies, I think, really two critical elements. There's others, but first of all, is the role of human creativity. That it's the promotion, of that quality in individuals, and giving them the room, the elbow room, shall we say, to explore, to innovate, to develop. That's the most critical feature for the development of the nation. And secondly, that manufacturing was even more important than agriculture, would become more important than agriculture, because manufacturing would actually increase the productivity of agriculture.
So fewer people can grow more food.
Right.
Which is, of course, what we see now with 2,000-acre cornfields with a GPS-guided combine and one guy doing the whole thing. Whereas before that would have been untold numbers of human beings and mules and everything else. So whether or not our current agricultural system is the best, maybe we'll come back to that.
Another,
but okay. So, is it true that, say, someone like a Jefferson and a Hamilton, then were they kind of on different sides of this?
Yeah.
Okay, so was Jefferson in the Adam Smith camp of more agricultural? He kind of had a pastoral vision of the nature of the world. He kind of didn't want a lot of change or innovation.
What's avoided in that is slavery. He was, he had slaves. He promoted slavery. He defended the idea of the agrarianism that Hamilton and of course the Southern representatives generally in the Congress of the time and so forth were promoting was a slave-based economy.
Okay.
Where the American system economists, and I'll start with Franklin, but they were members of the manumission societies to end slavery. They were committed to this morally, but also Henry Carey, Lincoln's economic advisor, wrote a very famous to us that are interested, but a famous book on slavery, and he develops very succinctly how slavery actually holds an economy back.
Yeah,
that part of the backwardness of the South relative to the North was because of slavery, and therefore, it was not good for the
It's not good for the slave. It's not good for the economy.
It's not good for not good for the society. He was making the point, right? And so it was something to be overcome.
Yeah.
So I think, this very clear distinction between and very importantly, George Washington came down on the side of Hamilton, and that was that majority view. Became the view of the United States.
Okay. Now, you've used this phrase, the American system.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard it a lot lately. It's making a comeback.
Yes, it is.
It's the mothballs are getting blown off and so forth. What is the American system? Is it unique to America? What makes it unique? And is it something we should embrace again?
I think, in a certain sense, it never went away. But yes, it's something we should embrace and discuss as we are now. I mean, it needs a broader discussion. The American people have to come in on this discussion. Economics, and as we're talking about, this is the most fundamental aspect or bears on the very fundamental aspects of family, community, one's life, the meaning of one's life.
Hey guys. Sarah Stone here. Sorry to interrupt what I'm sure is a riveting podcast episode, but Theology by the Pint needs your help to continue providing these podcasts, offering our in-person events, and growing so we can bring thoughtful conversation and the hope of the gospel to a world that's increasingly walking away from church and from faith. Now that we're a 501c3 nonprofit, all donations are tax deductible, so we've crunched the numbers, and if each listener of this episode gave just $1 for each episode you listen to, we'd put a huge dent in our annual budget. So consider giving today. Go to theologybythepint.org/give and click the link to donate. Thanks so much, and now back to our show.
A productive life. If you don't have a productive life, you basically tend to go insane. And we've got a society that basically, going back to the kind of point you were raising earlier, we've gone off the rails. How many genders are there? How many sexes? How many? Right. It's just the latest warp in this thing.
Well, I think even I think even the welfare state, where we. Now, I don't know how big the welfare state actually is or what a problem it is, but there are numbers of just millions of people who probably should be in the workforce and are not. And they're living somehow. I don't know where they're getting their money from. Maybe it's this Doge is finding the fraud in the Social Security or what have you, but it's not good not to work. I even think the people who are getting really wealthy off the service economy or this kind of modern economy we have, I don't know that they're happy people, I figured out how to, make more money on the stock by outsourcing the jobs overseas. And so I'm getting, the town in which the, Maytag factory used to be, it's decimated, but, my stock portfolio is looking good and I'm rich, but am I happy? So I think there's all kinds of insanity
Yes.
sort of going on, not just the headline things, but at a simpler level.
Yeah.
Just I think the lack of production is not good for
Right.
humanity.
It breeds irrationality.
Yeah.
People can't find their moorings.
Okay, but the American system
Yeah,
is
the
a
American
combination of what, would you say?
Well, first of all, I mean, the term capitalism didn't exist in the 1850s. I mean, it first shows up in the Oxford Dictionary, for example, in 1854.
Okay.
Okay, so
I thought Adam Smith, when the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker, I thought he said that's capitalism.
Division of labor, but he didn't invent that idea either. But the American system, Lafayette references it. Of course, Hamilton speaks to this. It was unique. The United States as a constitutional republic, democratic republic, with a small r.
Mm-hmm.
This was a unique development in the history of mankind.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't exist in Athens. It didn't, even on the city-state level, in the way in which the United States brought into being with the Constitution, and so you have, of course, you have the preamble of the Constitution most profoundly in terms of laying out a perspective, and the general welfare clause and so forth that flow from the Declaration of Independence and the preamble of the Constitution, and so the American system is starting there. It's not starting from some abstract concept of a free market or capitalism. That didn't exist at the time. The point was, how do we organize society? How do we collaboratively, deliberately, as a citizenry, right?
Mm-hmm.
The concept of a citizenry was new. How do we create this society so that it will perpetuate itself in the best sense?
Yeah.
So that's the American system. And so you have an American school of economics that grew up. And I mentioned some of them, the Careys, father and son, Matthew and Henry Carey, Friedrich List, who came here from Germany, became an American system, and went back to Germany to promote the American system in Germany. That resulted in ultimately in the unification of Germany, what became Germany.
He became an American what?
Citizen.
Oh, citizen. Okay, I thought you said system.
He came here, became a citizen.
Became a citizen, went back,
studied
and
the American economy and so forth. What was emerging, what this new model was emerging, to a large part, really shaped by Hamilton's reports, which summarized a lot of thinking of the time.
Yeah.
I mentioned Benjamin Franklin, very important. And then, earlier, there's often forgotten when we think about economics is the Massachusetts Bay Colony and the Winthrops that you had the first integrated iron complex there built. It's a national park now today, but this stretches back long before the American Revolution. How do we had to organize the production of our own metal items. We couldn't afford, the silver was just going out of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, buying from France and of course England, right? And we could, the silver was gone,
Right.
So
got to make it.
We got to make it, and they created a currency.
Wow.
The pine tree shelling. They created a currency, not as an end in itself, chasing the money, but as a medium of exchange to allow for the productive process to grow, to meet fundamental needs.
Is this a cliche, or do you think there is something real and legitimate about the kinds of people that came to America and made the country, that there's a certain grit or entrepreneurial spirit or toughness or practical common sense, something? Do you think when you talk about the American system, do you think that has something to do with it, the kind of nature of the people?
Yeah, I think there's probably a lot of features to it. They talked about the American citizenry at the time of the American Revolution as being the Latin farmers, because they spoke Latin, they knew Greek. The educational level was very high. Right. So I'm just saying that's a feature of this. But combine that with this, you got to make it.
Right.
and,
Right.
and you don't go home.
Right. There's no home to go to go to. There's some
and the founding fathers. I mean, they put their lives on the line, signing that declaration.
I think it was Mike Cernovich was on maybe Tim Pool's show, I think. Anyway, he was interviewed, and it was I think Mike Cernovich, I don't agree with him on his religion, but he's a pretty smart guy. And he was talking about how in America there's this kind of unique thing where it would be very, very common in a blue collar home for the owner of the home to have, economic textbooks, or like a Frederick Hayek, the Road to Serfdom, or, maybe we disagree with the Austrian School of Economics.
Yes,
but
we do.
But
I do.
The point is that they would have, they thought deeply about things. They were well educated. They were highly intelligent.
Yes.
And just because, so to speak, they did, manual labor, which might have been looked down on in Great Britain, or other parts of Europe, where to be a layabout, do nothing, noble was the greatest aim in life. In America, that wasn't always the case. You would find people with extremely high IQs who were farmers, and that's still true. Yes. I think to this day, but that might be something unique about America.
I think it is.
What are some? Well, let me. One question I kind of
and they were engaged from the beginning as citizens.
Yeah,
from the founding of the country, as citizens as opposed to subjects.
Oh, okay.
That's a different frame of.
I think I
outlook.
Could say, but what would you say is the difference?
Well, as a citizen, I have a right. I have. It doesn't have to be on paper. I may not even be quite conscious of my right, but instinctively, I know I have a right to a voice in the goings on of society, of my community, and so forth. And as opposed to a subject, I mean, it's a little. I mean, I think today, just personally, if you take if you talk to a Canadian, you instinctively quickly kind of get a difference in terms of different of attitude towards problems, in terms of going along to get along. And anyway, I think
that's it. See, we tend to say, well, they're liberal, or we tend to say that they're maybe we'll say like they're weak, but maybe the real distinction is that they simply view themselves as subjects.
Mm-hmm.
They don't really see themselves as having an ownership. I mean, in fact, was it in your book? Or did I read somewhere else recently that said that in Canada, Britain owns 80% of the land? Was that in your book?
Oh, yeah.
I was shocked. What, you mean Great Britain? The crown, the royal crown, ultimately, right?
Their crown holdings.
They own 80% of
forests,
the land? That's insane.
They're merely managed by provinces, etc., Montreal, whatever.
So they really are subjects.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in a very real sense of the word, whereas we own the deal.
Yeah.
This is our country, although the Bureau of Land Management owns 80% of Nevada, but that's
these overlays, but underneath it all.
But so it's like when there's an ownership, or there's a capacity, and you just unleash the American creative, spirit or productive, mindset. It's like, watch out, like look at what they can do, and that's what America is. Is that maybe why we've been such a great country?
Coming into this country, pick up on it.
Yeah,
because it's also
and they either adapt to that. Or they go back home. I mean, people forget a lot of the Irish and Italians and so forth that did come in the early part of later part of the 19th, early part of the 20th century. A lot of them went home.
Oh, that's interesting.
I'd heard as many as 50% actually went back.
Huh.
So you figure the ones that stayed
were
the ones with the stick-to-itiveness. They embraced the model. Because there was no welfare state at the time, which is, of course, a big difference, something we've talked about on this show a lot.
And I think that's an expression of the divine spark, that ability to pick up on that quality.
The one question, I'm going backwards now, but why should Christians care about economic questions? Because, the church doesn't really talk about economics. The church talks about sin and salvation and things of that nature, which, of course, is appropriate. But, does economics have a place in church conversations or religious conversations?
I certainly think it does. Morality, the responsibilities of making moral decisions, you can start with the family, but the community, the nation. I mean, it's really just different levels. But the responsibility to make moral decisions leads one to naturally think of the responsibilities I have for my brothers and sisters. Love leads one to want to work to better the circumstances of everyone. It's also the fulfillment of that statement in Genesis. Be fruitful, multiply.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
And so I see it as natural to the extent the churches have. I mean, you can cite popes, and I'm not Catholic, but you can cite popes, you can cite various religious leaders, Martin Luther King, I mean, whoever, on this this need to reach out, and where churches have blocked that, and I would associate some of that with those, like the Episcopalian Church that have, a very pro British view and view their own parishioners to a degree as subjects. I mean, that's my own view of it, but they're acting against their own interests.
Brian's views do not necessarily reflect the views of theology. No, I'm just kidding. That stuff is going to filter down culturally, or at least has the capacity to. I mean, I affirm all of that. It's something though that what can happen is, because the lines between, say, morality and economics and politics start to get pretty blurry after a while, because you realize that if we think something like personal freedom is a moral civic good, well, okay, that we could probably in the abstract agree on that. But if you don't have economic freedom, then you don't really have personal freedom. And there are most certainly political decisions, policies, bills, executive orders, etc., that will bear on economic liberty and maybe personal liberty. And so therefore, you can see quickly how, like, I don't know how you don't talk about something like this, So,
and you got to have sanitation. You got to have sewer systems. You got to have power. You got to, that doesn't happen just by,
right.
It doesn't just happen.
Right.
Unless you really think somebody else is taking care of you.
Right. Right.
But
okay. Well, so we have the American system. We have different views. We've talked about that, sort of different visions at the founding in terms of, kind of the Hamilton Jeffersonian approach. Let me jump to kind of maybe more contemporary economics.
Sure.
Because where I know we're doing we haven't actually talked about a lot of what's in the book, so I want to do that too. But very quickly, it seems like to me, I grew up with, say, Milton Friedman's, Free to Choose in my household, right? And it was sort of like, read this, people watched Free to Choose on the PBS series. Actually made my kids watch it. So Milton Friedman, who comes out of the Austrian school, which we mentioned earlier, he was kind of a popular figure, and that, from what I can tell, that became a kind of default, economic point of view for about 50 years on the right. Okay, so free markets, free trade, which led to the outsourcing argument, the sort of not protective quality of protecting our manufacturing and so forth.
A reaction to the Great Society, LBJ, and in many ways a correct opposition to that.
Okay.
Anyway, I'm just saying it was a reaction, though. It was
so kind of the left is really not so much for free markets, and the right comes and says, well, we are for free markets.
Yes,
so now it kind of seems like we're saying, well, yeah, we value freedom, but there are steps governments should take to benefit their citizens, and that might look like protectionism. It might look like engaging in a trade war, as we're quote unquote as we say.
Yes.
The tariffs is obviously a major part of that in the Trump administration. So do you think that sort of Milton Friedman's popular ideas, or the kind of just let the free market sort everything out, is kind of a dead thing? I think you're happy that there's been a shift on that, but maybe give kind of a summary of, if that really was the ruling economic model and how that's changing before our very eyes.
Well,
Big subject.
I think, first of all, Milton Friedman, I mean, most people aren't aware of Milton Friedman in terms of his actual, academic, shall we say, economic writings. But his area is crunching those numbers. Mm-hmm. His area is econometrics, or was, and that's a very important division that developed in economics. I would say after World War II in particular. I mean, you could say elements of it before, of course, but the old term for economics was political economy, which was a recognition that politics and economics are part of the same thing. Economics is not something that you just deal with in the abstract, but with econometrics, which really comes in, and of course is developed along with the computer and digitalization and all that, is economics simply says, well, no, we're not involved in politics anymore. We're up here and in this elevated level, and we're simply doing science, and that's a hoax. As it is in many fields. It's like artificial intelligence. I mean, it's certainly artificial, but it's not intelligence. It may be useful in various ways, but garbage in, garbage out, whatever. But econometrics is the basis of Friedman's thinking. So Friedman is simply applying that in certain as monetarism as a outlook in terms of an outlook which says simply by manipulating the money supply, that's all you need to do in terms of economics and in the sense of policy, and you can analyze the problems, booms and busts and so forth, simply on the basis of growth and expansion of the money supply and so on. Well, that's just a simplistic version of econometrics. Econometrics is saying, well, we can just digitalize everything, and we can know everything by simply knowing and manipulating these algorithms and so forth, and we can improve it and so on and so forth. When in fact, this is what leads Friedman to say, well, look, we should legalize prostitution. We should legalize drugs. It should be measured as part of the GDP. I mean,
he said that?
Yes.
Oh. Okay.
I mean, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
I mean, morality goes out the window.
Yeah.
And I did.
The Oscar-winning movie this year was about prostitution, so maybe he was ahead of his time.
I missed that. I'm sorry, but
I think you didn't miss much apparently. Okay. So yeah.
But here's from Adam Smith. He wrote this book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments. Most people have no idea, the Wealth of Nations, they may know by title. But here's just from chapter 3. It's just a short part of paragraph. The administration of the great system of the universe, however, the administration of the great system of the universe, however, the care of the universal happiness of all rational and sensible beings is the business of God and not of man. To man is allotted a much humbler department, but one much more suitable to the weaknesses of his powers and to the narrowness of his comprehension. And this is the concept of pleasure and pain. A Hobbesian view, right? Mankind makes all his decisions based on seeking pleasure and avoiding pain and so forth. And ruling out, the existence of a man made in the image of God, of the divine spark, right? Of creativity, that we're not just an animal. And I think that's really important to understanding. Not just, in the sense of a philosophy or something, but to understand kind of the mentality, if you will, or underlying assumptions, axiomatic assumptions in the thinking of libertarian free market economics. No, obviously, moral decisions have to be made.
Yeah.
You obviously don't let your kids stick their finger into a light socket.
Yeah.
And society requires certain circumstances to be able to exist, and you don't say, well, we'll just leave it to the free market, and if it ceases to exist, well, we'll go off and form another society somewhere else.
In other words, we don't really.
I'm sorry if that went on too much.
No, not at all. I mean, but it's like we've been existing in a way where it's like, well, we don't really have a point of view about anything. We'll just let the free market sort of come down, and and that's very much the kind of stock market approach, right? Well, if the stock market says that another penny on the dollar can be made on this stock if you again outsource labor, or it's an immoral product or something like that. No, the point is
legalize gambling.
Yeah. Which may be coming to Texas. I've heard.
Better not. We should stop it.
Absolutely. I've heard that was part of the deal that was made for the speakership of the House and all that. I don't know. Anyway, okay. So all that said, which we said a lot, but say I don't know that I asked for a definition of this earlier. The physical economy. I think you more or less spoken to it this entire time, but maybe say again. You mentioned a political economy, so I'm guessing opposed to that would be a physical economy,
right?
Which is your area that you're most interested in, and you think has it been sort of neglected? Is it making a comeback?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. It's been neglected. Bill Gates has his own view. We have to totally radically change the physical economy, of our society, green it, depopulate it, whatever. So the term is out there. It's recognized. I mentioned earlier deindustrialization. The idea of physical economy was associated with industrialization, and now we're in post-industrial society. So obviously, physical economy is passé.
Yeah, gotcha. Would the climate change narratives have something to do with this?
Yeah.
I mean, would you say that is and I'm not just trying to tee it up. I mean, I'm genuinely curious. Like, would you say that is a narrative constructed kind of for the purpose of reducing the physical economy?
Yeah, a Malthusian agenda.
Explain who Malthus was.
Parson Malthus, like Adam Smith, these are economists of the British East India Company. That's who they represented. And Malthus, promoted the idea that growth in terms of production grows only arithmetically, and population grows, like rabbits, geometrically, and therefore we're going to run out of food.
So Parson, because he was an Anglican priest in the Cotswolds in England, I believe, in one of the most beautiful parts of the world, and yet surrounded by that paradise, he was still worried about there being too many people, and he advocated.
Thank you for filling in the background.
Yeah, well, I researched him one day. So Malthusian is essentially depopulation. It's basically saying there are too many people. We need to figure out a way to reduce it so that we grow at the same rate as agricultural production, et cetera.
Right.
Whereas I think a more biblical point of view would be bring on the people and they'll figure it out. That's oversimplified, but I would argue that God provides for his people.
Yes.
And there were certainly times where people said, 1 billion people, oh no, we're all going to starve to death. And here we have almost 8 or 9 billion, and we have more than enough food. So the physical economy sort of, really talks about the nature of things. It sees value in labor. It sees value in taking the things of the world and bringing about, something out of it, taking raw material and making an automobile tire out of it, or, lumber for home building, et cetera.
Yes.
There's value in those things. We don't consider them dirty things that we want to talk about because we're into stock trading. It's a vibe shift a little bit. It's a cultural shift.
You got to live in a house, even if you're trading stocks.
Exactly. But someone else will build that. Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, well, someone else will deliver
illegal
the food.
Immigrant labor.
Well, and I would think that's a lot.
I'm not saying it should. But
Exactly. I think your point is, hey, like as a nation, we should have this. We should have a shift in the way that we think about things.
Yeah, and I really do think, as with Lyndon LaRouche, who that's kind of the background to the Promethean action that sponsored my book. You emphasize this that physical economy is really the king of the sciences, to put it another way, I mean, just this, the ultimate arbiter.
Yeah.
How do you know what you know is real, like climate change or I mean, what is the effect on increasing the potential population density?
Yeah.
The relative potential population density, the potential for growth of your society. A physical measurement of increasing energy flux density as applied to industrial processes, or say the increasing energy flux density across the whole land area of the United States. Is it growing or shrinking? Are you increasing your ability to make changes on nature for man? So that science itself has to reference physical economy ultimately. I mean, not that every experiment does or anything like that, but that any scientist working in any area, whether it's in medicine or others, the measure ultimately, is in the durable survival of society.
Yeah.
And durable survival means growth.
Yeah.
Because there are finite resources.
Yeah.
So we have to make creative breakthroughs. We have to define new resources. Yeah. And so we're constantly, it's this live by the sweat of thy brow and to eat bread. That's a constant process of a development that occurs. Yeah. And obviously, we can see many civilizations didn't cut it.
Right.
Others have.
Okay. So in the time we have left, what I want to do is maybe, I just wanted to lay out that, and was that
helpful?
Absolutely. Okay. And you would say it from your point of view, someone like Donald Trump is really a throwback. And maybe it's because he comes out of the building trades. I mean, I would consider it a throwback, but in the best possible way. Because he does seem to he's not really into this just free market dictates all things. The free market is an ultimate good. Right. He's like, well, if it works for us, it works for us. But but when you say America first, make America great again, tariffs to onshore, these are part of a comprehensive.
These reference to American system economics.
Yeah. Like I said, it's making a comeback. I mean, Steve Bannon, for example, has talked about it openly many times in recent months. So there is definitely a change. And that's why I thought this was especially, pertinent and relevant. Okay, but so you have this physical economy, this concept, and so what seems to have happened in America, though, as we sort of outsourced things, we've been stagnant. We've even fallen behind in many ways, and so now we got to kind of like catch up. We got to get back to our greatness in the sense of entrepreneurship, not just entrepreneurship, but making things, developing things. So in your book, and so the book again is called "Rebuild the USA" by Brian Lantz. So check it out because there's a lot of details, there's a lot of facts, there's a lot of numbers in the book.
On Amazon.
It's on Amazon. Thank you. And just as a few examples. You talk about to actually make something dies. What's it?
Tool and die.
Tool and die. What is that? And is it something we've lost? Is it something we can get back?
Yeah, it's going to take training because a tool and die machinist or expert, tool and die expert, a sophisticated level of machining and being a machinist, takes 5-6 years to qualify for, between mentoring and schooling and so on and so forth. So
and preschool teachers know what a die machine is, because for crafting, they'll often have, die machines where they cut out and stamp out paper. Right. So at a very, very basic level, we're talking about the ability to create machines or to use machines to create a replicable, manufactured product of
auto parts. Think of molding. Of parts, fenders of cars.
There was a story I read recently. It was about how there's only one company, I think in Taiwan, that can make cassette tape players anymore.
Oh, really?
No one listens to cassette tape, so I guess why have it? But now it's like a retro thing. But the parts, the capacity to make that machinery is. But then there's another guy that might have even been the same article, but he talked about a particular pasta shape he liked. It's not one of the big ones you'd find on the store. It's like a little star-shaped pattern. And he said, and he said he used to be able to, make it, but the tool and die, the little gadget you use to make that pasta out of the dough doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
And that's a very small example, but now you're looking at manufacturing, major systems, power plants, automobiles,
Right.
or the million other things like
Yeah,
airplane engines.
and tool and die along
Yeah.
with industrial engineers. I mean, these are critical to make revolutions in technology.
And it's not easy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so Apple, you have a quote
You've
in the
got to
book.
invent the machines that will produce the machines.
Yeah. So that's how manufacturing leads to, this is, I thought, quite interesting. I didn't really think of this, but actually having manufacturing, if you don't have manufacturing, you actually lose your innovation.
Yes.
Because manufacturing forces you to constantly innovate. Once you farm out your manufacturing, you're actually going to fall behind.
Right.
So I think you have a quote
And
from
you
Tim
lose
Cook.
all the spinoffs.
Yeah. All the unintended consequences, you might say, of innovations that are necessary. But Tim Cook talks about how, look, we make it in China because that's where all the good machinists are.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like
I can. He said, I think, paraphrasing, I can pull it together. I can fill a football stadium in China with tool and die and industrial engineers. I can't fill a room in the United States.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean, that's
and that's something we don't know,
Mhm.
and not to mention the fact that the people who do have those skills are retiring at a record rate, right? That's if the boomers were the last folks to sort of have that skill because that's what was our heyday of manufacturing, and they're all retiring, they're not passing that information on,
right. And this is a whole nother topic, but this gets to this question of monetarism and
Pull that mic close.
simply.
You can pull the mic to you.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
This question of Milton Friedman and simply manipulating the money supply. I mean, that's what essentially the Federal Reserve does. It has a second obligation to ensure something like full employment. But, the main thing is to adjust the money supply to prevent inflation, right? Yeah. And so we have these booms and busts in terms of turning off and off the spigot in terms of interest rates.
Yeah.
A real consequence of that is why young men, for example, don't become tool and die experts today. They don't want to become machinists because they could be one today and they could be fired 2 years from now.
Yeah.
The physical economy has been constantly through the ringer.
Well, it's considered dirty work. That's what I was saying earlier. It's considered culturally to be beneath, the lawyer, the medical class, or what have you.
Yes.
And like you said, well,
I think
maybe
that's starting
they'll
to change some. But
I do too. I think because they make good money. They're going to be making more than doctors for too long. But the other thing is, yes, like how do you have job security if they're just going to ship it overseas? And you're going to train your replacement. So I think people see that and it makes them nervous, and rightfully so. So we have to
how can I support a family? How can I raise kids?
We got to put a flag in the ground, sort of stake in the ground or something. We got to put something in the ground and say we're here and we're dedicating. I mean, maybe the Taiwan super chip. I mean, it's not an American company, but they are going to make their super chips, in Phoenix.
So bringing back, foreign capital in here to build here rather than somewhere else is definitely a step forward.
In the right direction, but not where we ultimately want to be.
Because we got so on any given day, the money market, basically treasuries, but the money market funds. There's $7 trillion parked on any given day in the United States in money market funds.
Yeah.
Just cash.
Yeah.
Why is it there, and why instead are we getting our capital from Taiwan or Germany or who are coming in, setting up factories here, training our workers, and making a profit, producing here? Yeah. If they can do it, why don't we do it? Why don't our capitalists, quote unquote? So we got to revive this, and Elon Musk is an example. We got to revive this entrepreneurial spirit.
Right. An example in a good way.
Frontier spirit. Yeah.
SpaceX.
It's not capitalism or, that means all kinds of funny things.
Right.
But in terms of, American system economics, but just people thinking as productive creators.
Okay. Another example, energy production, because this is part of the chain,
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the great follies, one of the great sillinesses, that's not a word, of our age is, you mentioned, Elon Musk, we all need to be driving electric cars, but we don't have enough power plants, and Trump has come out and said this, love him or hate him, it's just a fact. So you talk a lot about nuclear power. There's a lot of advancements. Maybe just give us a snapshot of some of the, kind of the future of power generation. Which isn't something it's not really sexy. We don't like to think about it, but you sure like to have electricity, I bet.
Yeah. And look, our total energy consumption in the United States, flatlined in the 1990s. Total energy, it just flatlined. Not just per capita, but total energy consumption.
Consumption.
Yeah.
Well, that's
electricity
good, right?
and oil and gas
Okay.
and,
That means what we use.
what we use, total
Okay.
energy we use. But the population since then has grown by over
Okay.
60 million people.
Is that a good thing or a
Well,
bad thing?
yeah. Where did the energy come to keep, for those people? Well, it didn't come, right? And that's why
Yeah.
our lights flicker. That's why we have brownouts and blackouts. I mean, I'm not just talking about a windstorm, but in terms of we don't have enough energy to go around now.
Especially if we need to charge our cars and things like that. So,
Yeah. So yeah.
but there are good solutions.
And in fact, energy, in terms of a driver to rebuild the United States as a manufacturing superpower or anything like that,
Yeah.
to reverse our trade deficit, to begin being a capital goods exporter, as we used to be. Energy is a great place to start. If you go to the frontiers, if you go to the cutting edge. Now, nuclear power, including the next fast neutron nuclear reactors, which is the next generation, most of the small modular reactors are of that sort. You're producing far more energy. The costs come down dramatically, and that's something that's another subject. But anyway, energy prices with nuclear power can come down dramatically.
Yeah.
But to build those power plants, to build hundreds, say, of nuclear power plants in the United States, you're going to have to build out the supply chains for those plants, right? Those tool and die, those machinists, and so on and so forth.
It's almost a chicken and egg thing. Because to build the power plant, you need tool and die. To build the tool and die plant, you need power. But anyway,
okay, right.
We'll get it all done. Though.
Okay, but one area we can grab that from, if we're thinking about it, right? Trump's put on the table cutting the defense budget by 50%. That used to be a Democratic Party idea, or
right.
liberal left idea.
Yeah.
And he says, I want to talk to President Xi of China and President Putin of Russia about that. After we get these Ukraine and the Middle East calm down, I'm going to talk to them about that. And Putin responded, yeah, I'm open to that.
Yeah.
Okay, now we have an enormous, in the United States, we've got 1.3 to 1.5 million subcontracting employees in the aerospace defense sector.
Wow.
We've got 900,000 in the big 5 or 6 aerospace defense companies.
Wow.
Right?
That's wild.
This is the largest concentration of skilled work capability, skilled workers.
Yeah.
Thoughtful, thinking, problem solving.
Yeah.
Many of these subcontractors are building, they're brought in to say, okay, we need you to build this specialty item.
Yeah.
Right, with this specialty metal, with these specialty tools, right?
Yeah.
They specialize. So it's incredible capacity. So you could shift, if you can move to moderate this insane military spending through in a thoughtful way, you could free up a lot of skilled labor and machine tools and equipment to jumpstart this, to solve this chicken and egg problem, right?
Sure.
Okay, so building that out, well, then you build out supply chains that then apply to all the other areas of manufacturing and industry.
So this isn't something that's going to get done in 4 years. You're talking decades. But you got to start somewhere.
You get a big start on this. Yeah.
I mean, just a handful of other.
Because we have so many people that aren't productively employed now.
Right.
We can pull people off the streets that are being kicked to the curb. I mean, we can do I've promoted the idea of a space CCC, Civilian Conservation Corps. We can do an updated, modern space CCC with our inner cities, but also, we have poverty in rural areas. It's not, it's not one of the other. So anyway, we could do a lot to expand our productive workforce. But again, that would take a longer time. But in the short term, particularly our aerospace defense sector and the Department of Defense itself could be a source.
A couple other things people may not think about, but you have a whole section on natural resources. Water. People are always freaking out about not having enough water. We're going to drain the aquifers, they'll say. Meanwhile, we could be desalinating. We have all the water we could ever want. We just got to get the salt out of it, and we could have all the,
We're surrounded by water.
But I kind of hinted at this, but there are, relatively like kind of micro nuclear power plants available that I think you mentioned Mitsubishi makes these, incredible little nuclear generators. They're not the big 3 Mile Island, what have you, but I think aren't there some college campuses that are powered by like miniature nuclear reactors? Does that sound crazy?
Well, we have not that I know of, but there are nuclear reactors. I mean, there's one under UT Austin. There's a nuclear reactor.
Maybe that's what I'm thinking of. Okay.
There's, I think it's 2 now at Texas A&M.
Okay.
They train nuclear engineers.
Oh,
that's where
I was getting confused. Okay.
But now Texas A&M, as you may know, they've announced this whole project covering, I believe it's 2,400 acres, which they're dedicating for startup nuclear power plant projects. And 3 or 4 companies have already signed on. They're going to locate there. That's being worked through with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, et cetera.
Electric cars make a lot more sense if we have, charging stations everywhere. It's nuclear powered, so it's relatively cheap, and there's a lot of it, and there's infrastructure for it. I still don't like the idea of electric cars for many reasons, but it might make it might make more sense. But even things like
that's one of those things where people can, like, Trump among others says people should make a choice.
In that sense, we might agree with Milton Friedman.
It
was a good title of a
place
book.
for markets.
But like lumber, again, it's not a kind of sexy thing, but like it's so foundational to. I mean, you look at how much a house costs or anything, and part of that's labor costs have gone up. It doesn't have to be that way. We have lots of lumber. It's untapped,
right?
For whatever
we're cutting
reason.
1/10 of the lumber today out of our national forests. 1/10 of what we were cutting in the 1990s.
Oh my gosh! Wow,
1/10.
That wasn't even that long ago,
right?
That was when they were building McMansions, the 1990s home architecture.
And that's another. We've got to create the space, the financing, to begin building. Starter homes again.
Right.
Normally considered under 1,400 square feet.
Right.
For young families.
Right.
And Trump is promising this. I mean, it should be a promise that everybody wants to see fulfilled.
Yeah.
Democrat and Republican. The point is, we're producing virtually zero entry-level homes now today. It's about 60,000 maybe a year, even less than that.
Yeah.
For the whole country. 40% of our homes used to be entry-level homes.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And again, our population's grown, but the housing hasn't. Yeah, we get the big mansions, but that's not.
Well, that's where the money is. That's where the finance is. That's where the back end profit is. I think, and so I think that's drives so much of these conversations.
Yeah, we have over 1 million households being formed every year.
Yeah,
we're producing maybe 550, 600,000 homes a year.
But right, math doesn't work. But to go back to say Malthus, or in those kinds of ideas, people are not having kids. They don't want to have kids. They're worried about having kids because they're so expensive and they can't afford it. And there are concerns about the future and things like that. But like we need a 1,400 square foot home to get started and climb, the property ladder. And that's harder and harder to come by. Trump even talked about, I don't know if this will ever happen, but he talked about building 10 kind of great American cities, kind of from scratch. That'd be interesting,
because it's a good idea.
Because the American government owns, as we kind of said earlier, owns a ton of land, that we could be using and building and mining. You have a whole chapter about mining as well. Yeah. They're just untapped resources. Yep. So it seems kind of silly.
Yes, we can go to the frontiers again.
Yeah, that's funny. In our own country.
But in our own country, too. Yeah. 50% of the land in the West is federally owned land. Yeah. Locked up, largely. Even though you can mine, obviously, in areas, it takes you 5-10 years to go through the permitting process. Large mines, are incredibly difficult to build in the U.S. Yeah. Again, this is something that's back on the agenda now.
Well, and that's what I think is exciting about the times we're living in. We've kind of tried the finance only model. Maybe if I tried to had to kind of summarize this, where the only thing that matters is the bottom line. I think we tried it, and it failed. I mean, a lot of people got rich, you know, and there's more kind of money out there than ever, and the stock market is good, but there was a hollowing out of our country in many respects, and there's a brain drain. Now we don't know how to make things. We don't know how to do toil and die. We don't know. We don't have machinists. We don't have enough power. There's just been a stagnation. We don't have enough water. So we have parts, for example, you talk about how we have parts of our country that are basically deserts. Well, they don't have to be.
Yeah.
We could desalinate the water. We could
right underground.
It's right underground. It's in aquifers.
Yeah,
we could get it. We could
brackish water. You know, it's not a matter of draining the good water. We can take the brackish water and desalinate it.
Yeah, and we could create. I mean, if you've ever looked at, for example, what artist renditions of, say, what ancient Egypt looked like, these were not dry places. These were beautiful green places. They used aqueducts or you know, what have you, but they brought water into places, and they were beautiful places where you read in the Bible, it talks about they had melons and I can't even grow cucumbers, but apparently they had lots of them in Egypt, you know, and that was anyway, you get the idea. So, talk about where can people get the book if people want to get more, because there's lots of details in here. If you really want to know about the physical economy and what the next 20 years of your life are probably, hopefully, going to look like if Trump sort of has his way and his model kind of wins out, and he can get this ball rolling, but the torch can be carried by people who really understand what he's trying to do with his kind of movement. I think this is a great primer on the kind of nuts and bolts of that. So if someone's really into that, what's the book? Where do they find it? Yeah.
Rebuild the USA, the Trump presidency and beyond. That's the full title.
Yeah.
Brian Lantz, Lantz. It's available on Amazon. You can buy it there, Kindle or paperback, either version.
Yeah.
And it's right there. Go for it.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot. We have antitrust is a whole area we haven't covered.
I had a question about central banks, but I thought, you know, that's a big topic too. But
dismantle it. Yeah.
Yeah, and because Hamilton had a kind of vision of a central bank that those of us on the kind of Milton Friedman right for all these years, he's bad. He was a central banker.
Yeah, it's not true. He was opposed to central banking system.
Interesting.
The national bank was the generation of credit for production.
Gotcha.
You know, it's like how a Main Street bank thinks about lending, or used to think about lending to the local community to make it prosper, you know.
Right. Yeah, savings and loans. You have a whole thing about that. Yeah. Okay, well, Brian Lantz, thanks so much for joining us today. For those of you who really like these kinds of more economic conversations, hopefully you found this quite interesting. There's a lot of research for you to do in the wake of this conversance, but do check out Theology by the Pint.
Yeah, and I welcome your comments, questions via email or LantzEconomy@gmail.com is my
LANTZ economy
at
Cool.
gmail.com.
Yeah, thank you for putting that out. So contact Brian if you have questions. theologybythepint.org. Find out about our upcoming events, how you can help us.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. And until next time, we encourage you to question freely, think deeply, and disagree as needed.